I'm stoked to have you, and I want to talk about your amazing legacy, and I want to talk about the amazing music you've just put out. And I want to start from the beginning, some of the early experiences, because as I was researching, it became very clear that you've been a musician since you were a teenager, and you were actually touring as a teenager and performing around. What are some of those early influences that got you starting to play, and how did you end up as a teen performing around?
Okay, well, it's a long story, but and an interesting story. I started playing drums when I was 15 because these guys who were starting a band in I think it was actually late middle school or early high school years. We were like 14, and I was part of an Indian dancing troupe. I was very into Plains Indians and things like that, and I belonged to this thing called Heyoka Indian Dancers, and I made a costume. I made it an original like Indian Plains Indian costume. I was really into that, and everybody had to play a drum when other people danced, and I was kind of the best person at that. And we performed at a school function at some point, and these kids said, "You got rhythm. You're the drummer in our band. We're starting a band." And at that time, it was sort of before really rock and roll, and so my early stuff was really playing like dance music, mostly American songbook. It's called American songbook, the standards of the 30s and 40s, and playing in hotels and for like bar mitzvahs and weddings and all kinds of functions like that. Then from and when I started to get a little older, was 16, 17, I started to play and do gigs. I lived in Brooklyn, but I was doing gigs all over New York with other young guys and starting to try to play bebop and trying to play jazz and playing a lot up at Columbia University. And I got into like the sort of traditional jazz thing, and I was playing a lot of that and getting called for that. And then when I was 19, I got called for a gig with a band called Rick Lundy and the Saints. They were kind of a very slick Dixieland outfit out of the University of Pennsylvania, and they had a job on the Holland America lines going back and forth to Europe, and I did that. And I also toured. We didn't really tour Europe. We had some gigs in Germany and a couple of gigs in Holland, and then I hitchhiked around Europe while we weren't performing. I was 19 then, and then I came out to San Francisco and mainly gave up drumming, or I didn't really want to be a musician. I wanted to be a painter. I wanted to be an artist. And I came to San Francisco to go to art school. And at the art school, it turned out that there was a band mostly composed of other painters and teachers at the art school. And it was kind of Dixieland also, about traditional jazz. And which was very popular in San Francisco in the late 50s and early 60s. It was something called the San Francisco Revival, where a lot of New Orleans musicians had moved to San Francisco. And so that style of music was happening a lot. There were a lot of traditional jazz, New Orleans style, what people will call Dixieland in those days, bands. And so I did that with that band, but only at parties. I really didn't play a lot of gigs. It was mostly playing at parties, school parties for other artists, and all of the people in the band were all other artists. And then when the 60s thing sort of started to break in San Francisco with the psychedelic bands, that's kind of where I started going to some of the dances and seeing some of the bands and thinking I'd like to be in one of those bands.
Yeah,
And that eventually
yeah. And you
wound up
didn't,
in Big Brother and the Holding Company.
yeah, you didn't think you were going to be playing music, right? You thought your path would be just pursuing art. Is that right?
Exactly, exactly. I was doing teaching. I had won a Fulbright fellowship in painting in 1964, and I went to Poland. I lived in Poland for a year, and that's a whole other story of why I went to Poland. But I was in Krakow. I lived in Krakow, and it was a sort of vibrant art scene and music scene at the time there. And when I came back from that, I was hired by my alma mater, the San Francisco Art Institute, to teach beginning and intermediate painting. I was 25 years old, and I thought I knew a lot. I thought I was ready to start teaching. And it was while I was teaching art at the San Francisco Art Institute that I met Peter Alvin, who was the bass player in Big Brother and Holding Company, and went to see them. And we started. I actually had a studio. I had a loft, and I met Peter because he worked in a screen printing place down the street, and I would see him in his cafe lunchtime, and I said, "Gee, I heard your band," and so on and so forth, and you guys are great, but your drummer sucks, and if you ever need another drummer, give me a call. So that's kind of how I got into that. I was still teaching. I was teaching and I was painting and doing all of that. And all of a sudden, they called me one weekend and said, "Come on down and play with us." And it was a club called the Matrix in San Francisco. And that was March of 1966. And that, for a certain point on that, I thought I could sort of do both things. I thought I could be a painter and just be in this band. It was before Janis. Janis came as a thing we didn't know in June, about 3 months after I joined the band. Chet Helms, who was our manager at the time, brought her from Texas. He said, "I know this singer in Texas, and I think she'd be good with you guys."
Yeah. Well, I want to ask
So
about.
after that, when Janis joined the band, I had to make this big decision because everybody wanted to live together and get a house together and rehearse every day and all of that. And I had to kind of give up my loft in San Francisco, give up my apartment in North Beach, and move into a house with the band out in the Marin County in a place called Lagunitas. And that was and then I didn't really paint again or do art again for about 13 years, mostly just doing music.
I want to ask you a few questions about the pre-Janis. When you got into the band. Well, first of all, when you got into the band, Sam was in it, and Peter and James. It was that core unit. What was the repertoire that you guys were playing? What was it? The stuff that was on the Peter and Sam and James stuff?
Some of it, yeah, some of that was on the original. We used to do a lot of jamming, a lot of like really, well, we almost didn't know sometimes what we were going to do. There was some of that, but then there were some things that Peter sang. Peter was the main singer, and he liked rhythm and blues. He did some a Little Richard stuff. He did some Howlin' Wolf stuff, and we did John Lee Hooker stuff.
Mm.
So it was mostly trying to do blues, but it wasn't really, we weren't trying to be an authentic blues band. We were trying to do psychedelic blues because James Gurley, who was mainly the featured performer in the band at that time, was a very unusual player. And he was not like really a guy who played fundamental blues. He was very much really out there with sound and noise and electronics and stuff like that. So we would play these things and then we would go off into these other spaces with the music. We would start out in the blues, kind of John Lee Hooker, Walk That Walk, stuff like that. And then it would go some other places. So that was kind of the focus of the band. It was mostly very, very high energy. We almost had like, I would say a punk rock energy. We would play everything, some things extremely fast and extremely hard. I would break sticks, I would break drum heads and things like that. And it was just like that. And sometimes we didn't know we had some train wrecks on stage and things like that, but we didn't care. It was very free and loose. And of course, it changed when Janis came in. We had to control it and have more songs and learn arrangements and things like that. It solidified more in that direction. But in the early times, the first 3 months I was in the band, it was loose. It was blues. Everybody loved blues, but we weren't trying to be called Butterfield or anything like that. We were going off in another way with the blues, sort of as a starting off.
Did you guys record anything at that point? Any like home recordings on tape?
There's there's an early recording that I actually, in the early 80s, I went and researched to try to find tapes of, early Big Brother stuff from a time before we were signed to any record contract. And I found some tapes and I put it out as an album in 1982 that I produced called Cheaper Thrills. And
Amazing.
that has some of the stuff. One of the things that we would do, we did a version of the a thing we call In the Hall of the Mountain King, which is a Grieg piece by Grieg, the composer. I think he was a Norwegian, maybe. And everybody knows that da 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 da. And we would start off with that and then go off into psychedelic. And so we have recordings of that, and we have some recordings of Peter singing things we did. "Oh My Soul," which was I think it was either James. Oh, it was Little Richard. It was Little Richard. And we have a few things from that time, and a few things just when Janis first joined the band. I think the recording was actually done. The tapes that I found were done in July of 1966. So there's some recordings out there. A European company called Charlie Records at some point about maybe 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, put out a CD set called The Lost Tapes based on that thing. And it had a whole booklet with it and all about that. That I wrote some of the liner notes for that. So that's kind of what's out there of that. It's rough. Some of it is pretty rough. It's not great recording quality. It kind of gives you an idea of what Big Brother was in the very early days and the kind of energy that we had.
Incredible. And what was the reason to start seeking out another singer, and which ultimately came to be Janis?
Yeah, that's a lot of that is just the influence that the most popular band in San Francisco, the most successful band, was the Jefferson Airplane, for sure. And they had a lead singer who was a gal named Signe Anderson. And the other band that had a lead singer was called the Great Society, and they had a lead singer named Grace Slick. And at some point, Signe Anderson had a baby, and she didn't want to perform anymore. And the Jefferson Airplane stole Grace Slick from the Great Society. And they had an album called Jefferson Airplane Take Off. And literally, they did take off. They started to have national hits and things like that. And we aspired to the same thing. We wanted to get further in the music. And we auditioned a few singers. We started talking about it. I mean, really early on when I first joined the band, it was sort of in the air. And Peter was the mostly the motivated person to really get other singers to come in and audition. And we had a few singers audition who came to rehearsals. And mostly because of the energy and the volume of Big Brother, they couldn't be heard. They just didn't have the power. And our manager was this person, Chet Helms, who was fairly well known because he was like Bill Graham was the Fillmore Auditorium, and Chet Helms was the promoter for a thing called the Avalon Ballroom or the Family Dog. So they were the two main promoters. But Chet also managed Big Brother. And Chet was from Texas. And Chet had known Janis in Austin, in this whole Austin folk bluesy scene of the early 60s. And Janis had come to San Francisco in the early 60s. And she'd gotten strung out on speed. And she'd had, a lot of trouble in her life. A lot of, really down things happened to her. And she went back to Texas to try to straighten out her life. And she was kind of reluctant to come back to San Francisco. But Chet, called her and spoke to her. I think he said, you got to come out here. You can't believe what's happening out in San Francisco. It's incredible. And I'm managing this band, and you would be great with this band. And anyway, he basically talked her into coming out. And the minute she came to one of our rehearsals in early June, I think it was June 8th or 9th of 1966, it was like the minute she sang, she had the power. She had that power to sing with us. So it was kind of instantaneous that she was it.
Yeah.
Meant to be.
And how did the repertoire that you were playing before start changing, or what were the soonest changes that you know?
The way it worked in those days was Peter, Peter and not Sam, Peter and James, but mostly Peter had been very much a part of the early folk music movement in San Francisco. There was a whole folk music scene, both in San Francisco, New York, and Boston, I would say were the main centers. And so Peter had been in a lot of like shows, hootenannies, things like that. And he knew Janis. He had been at performances where she had sang. So he knew her work and he knew a lot of the music that she knew. So when she first came in the band, they would say, okay, what do you know? Do you know Down on Me, which was one of the songs, which was a gospel song,
Yeah.
actually. Even though Janis is credited as the writer of it, she didn't really write it. It was a gospel song that had been on Alan Lomax,
Hmm.
Folkways record. And a lot of the folkies from that time knew that song, and they knew songs like, I can't think of some of the others, but that was the starting off point. There was songs like I Know You Writer.
Yeah.
Grateful Dead did that. We did that because it was a folk song that these guys had done in their folk context years before, a few years before. And so we're going to bring it now into a rock and roll context and add rhythm to it, add drums to it, and things like that. That didn't happen before. So that was the starting off point. And then Janis had other songs that she knew. She said, I've got this song that this guy wrote for me in Texas. And it's called Bye Bye Baby. And it's easy. We could play that. And it was sort of like in the beginning, we had maybe the Big Brother repertoire, which was a lot of instrumental stuff, and Peter singing. And then there were like 5 or 6 songs that Janis and Peter would start with. And that gradually the repertoire grew that way. And it became more songs that Janis could sing and less Peter could sing. And so over the first year, that's kind of the way it evolved.
And then how soon after Janice got involved did you all end up in Chicago and start? And I'd love you to recount the story of signing with Mainstream and record this first album
Yeah,
right
yeah,
here.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's another story, and that was very soon after Janis joined the band. Uh, it was like within a month after she joined the band, we got this offer to come to the Jefferson Airplane had actually gone first and played at this club called Mother Blues, which was in Chicago, in that section where there were a bunch of blues clubs and folk clubs in this area, and Old Town of Chicago it was called. And the Jefferson Airplane, I think, only played there a weekend, maybe 3 nights. But they had heard about Big Brother and they'd heard about Janis, and they asked us to play there for a month. And we heard about it, and it was proposed, and everybody wanted to do it. Janis wasn't sure. She had just joined the band, and right away, sometime right after she joined the band, she was approached by a producer from LA, a guy named Paul Rothschild,
Yeah.
who had produced Paul Butterfield, and I was again the producer for The Doors, and he was a well-known producer, and he wanted her. He heard her play with Big Brother and early on, probably in late June or July. He was in San Francisco. I think he might have been in San Francisco with Paul Butterfield. But anyway, he heard Janis perform with Big Brother, and he wanted to take her and put her in a band, an all-star band in LA with Taj Mahal and a guitarist named Steve Mann. I forget who else, a few other people who were, great players all in LA. And he was offering her, he would get her a house, he would get her a car, he would take care of her basically. And she'd be part of this band, of all-star band. And then at the other side, Big Brother was saying, we're going to Chicago and we have this gig for a month in Chicago. And you got to decide what are you going to do. And she decided to go to Chicago with Big Brother. And somewhere when we were in Chicago, we had a tough time. We were not getting paid by the club after a couple of weeks. They said they can't pay us, that we weren't bringing in enough people and we were too weird And, we weren't a blues band. We weren't a folk band. What is this? All of that. It was a strange time. And all of a sudden this record company comes along, this guy, Bobby Shad, and says, I want to record you guys. I'll sign you to a record contract. And, it was a kind of a thing that was, Janis wanted to do it. She wanted to record. And at the same time, we also wanted to lock her into the band.
Yeah.
I think there was a certain sense of that going on at the time too. And, but she wanted to do it. She really wanted to record. And we all thought, that it didn't matter. It's a small record company, but it'll get us started and all of it, whatever. We signed, we had no advance. They gave us no money at all. It was all like going in the studio, one or two takes on everything. We didn't have any artistic control. It was kind of crazy, but we were desperate. We were all desperate. We were living in Chicago in Peter's uncle's house out in Glenview. We were all living and sleeping on the floor. And it was a crazy situation. We were figuring we had to get money to get back to San Francisco. We didn't know how we would get money to get back to San Francisco. Mainstream records wouldn't give us anything, but mainstream records said, well, if you record, we could pay union scale because we were all in the union and we had to be paid union scale. And I forget how that worked out, but we did that and we got enough money to get back to San Francisco. Peter flew back to San Francisco. His wife, he was married at the time, and his wife sent him some money and they was going to plane ticket. The rest of us, we got a drive-away car. We got this car that, someone wanted there. It was a big Thunderbird. It was a big Ford Thunderbird when the Thunderbirds were big. It was a few years when they made this big model Thunderbird. And we got that car and it was James, Janis, Sam's girlfriend Rita, and myself, and a set of drums and two Dan Electro amplifiers and all the guitars in this car. And we drove from Chicago to San Francisco and got back home. And then later we recorded again in LA. We recorded more tracks for Mainstream. And Mainstream didn't do anything with it. They didn't put anything out except singles. And the first single came out, sometime in the fall of 1960, maybe November or something like that. And it wasn't even featuring Janis. It was a song that Peter was singing the lead on called Blind Man. And I think the other side was All Is Loneliness, which was a Moondog song. Really
Moondog
piece that we did also, stuff like that. And then they put out another single, I think it was Down on Me and Call on Me. And that was pretty much it. And then nothing happened. The record really didn't do anything. We weren't getting any royalties or anything. And we were just playing a lot in San Francisco. And then Monterey Pop happened.
Yeah.
And when Monterey Pop happened, which was almost a year later, 67, immediately Mainstream put out that record.
Right.
Have there. And then, of course, other record companies wanted to sign us. And they had to buy out the contracts for Mainstream. And that costs us a lot of money because we had to pay back from our first royalties some of the money that CBS Columbia had to pay Mainstream, which was, I think, about $250,000 in 1967 money, which you can sort of translate into about $10 million now, something like that, equivalent. But that's what happened. Mainstream owned us. And it wasn't easy to get out of that contract. But once we played at Monterey, we knew we couldn't be with a record like Mainstream. We had to have artistic control. We had to do something good. We had to try to make a really good record with a really good producer and really try to sound like what we really sounded. So that's kind of
amazing. I want to ask you a little about Monterey. I've had the opportunity to speak with Richie Furay of Buffalo Springfield and a couple of the dudes from Moby Grape, and I've asked each of them about Monterey, and they've got their own unique recollections. And I'm just curious, from your standpoint, obviously it was the event that blew you guys up into the mainstream and allowed you to get to Cheap Thrills. But what is your, personal recollection of being there and playing And then the second question is, I'm curious why, because I know you guys played two sets. And in fact, just interesting, we're doing this interview today on June 20th. The second set in Monterey you guys did was June 18th. So that was 58 years ago. So I'm curious, why was the first set you guys did at Monterey not filmed that led you guys to do the two songs on the final day?
Okay, let me answer your first part
Yeah,
of your question.
please. Yeah.
Monterey Pop was great. It was an incredible festival. And you got to, realize that the putting it on and the variety of music that took place at Monterey was unprecedented at the time. There was nothing ever like it. You had Ravi Shankar, you had Lou Rawls, you had UMass Aquila, you had the Association, Country Joint. I mean, the variety, the range of music that happened at Monterey and how incredible everybody was. Otis Redding,
Mm.
Jimi Hendrix, The Who. I mean, everything. It's a landmark thing. And it was also a great party. The backstage scene, there was a full bar, there was beautiful food, buffet. It was really great. At the same time, what was going on was that the producers of it, Lou Adler and John Phillips, had basically said this is going to be a free, everybody's going to play for free. I think the only performer that got paid was Ravi Shankar, but everybody else was playing for free and just, for expenses. And what happened was that they decided to make a film out of it. They decided to film it. And the performers didn't know that. None of the performers really knew that that was part of the way that they were going to generate money eventually from this free concert. And for the San Francisco bands, that was a really an impediment. It was an obstacle because the San Francisco bands at the time, were very progressive and doing a lot of free shows and believing in sort of, for fun and for free, that music should have an aspect that we all wanted to, make it and make a living too out of music. We wanted, when someone said we're putting on a free concert, we said, okay, is it going to be free? Everybody's playing for free. Yeah, okay, we'll do it. And then to find out that they're going to make this movie, it's going to generate millions of dollars, and they're going to own it, and the artists who are not going to participate in that was an obstacle to, I think, a lot of the San Francisco bands, more so than any of the other bands. So what happened at Monterey was they basically, before performers went on stage, they had an agreement. You had to sign off. Literally, right as you were going on stage, they presented this contract. That we're going to film this, and is it okay? Sign off. And a lot of the San Francisco bands said, no, we're here to play for free, for fun and free, and we're not going to be in your movie. So that's kind of what happened with Steve Miller Band, Moby Grape.
Right.
Country Joe signed it. I think the Airplane signed it. The
Yeah.
Grateful Dead didn't sign it. Grateful Dead didn't sign it. That's why they weren't originally in the movie. Steve Miller's not in the movie, and Big Brother was not going to be in the movie. But then what happened was after we played our first performance, which was a Saturday afternoon, they said, we have to have this Janis. They had to have her in the movie. And in fact, behind the scenes, someone said to Penny Baker, the director, or to Lou Abbott, that if you don't have her in the movie, there's no movie. So they basically sent their heavy guns to Janis. They sent Albert Grossman and Lou Abbott, and they all got Janis. They all sort of isolated her and said, we want you in the movie. You're going to be like an incredible star. We have to have you in the movie. You've got to talk the rest of the band into being in the movie. And so that's what happened. It became like a meeting amongst us as a band. And our manager at the time, who was a guy named Julius Clarkin, was definitely against it. He didn't want it. And the band was sort of like, we didn't know. And Janis was like, I got to be in this movie. Got to be in this movie. It's, everything. So eventually she won, and they said, okay, we will put you on again so that we can film it, because they didn't film the first set. Although that's not quite true either because some people did film. There are some shots of things on the first set, but basically they were told in our first set to turn the cameras off. So they wanted to film. So we were put on in prime time the following night, and we only did, I think, two or three songs. It was combination of the two and Ball and Chain, and that's what's in the movie. And then, of course, when the movie came out, the band was a little bit shocked because it was jazz. And that, so the feeling about Monterey Pop is that it was great. It was a great party. There's no question about it. It was a fabulous event and festival, one of the greatest of, ever. At the same time, for Big Brother, it was the turning point. It was where Janis went from being a band member to being the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it also changed everything because after that we fired our manager and Albert Grossman, who was the dominant, who was Dylan's manager, he was Peter Paul, Mary's manager, he was Paul Butterfield's manager. He was a giant in the industry, and he became our manager. But what he really wanted was he wanted the band to sort of change and become more like a tight sort of, blues rock band. He he didn't like James Gurley. He didn't like James Gurley's playing. And at some point he even suggested that for him to sort of continue on with us, we would have to get rid of James Gurley and get another guitar. But anyway, we couldn't do that. And eventually Janis left the band. So that's the whole story there. But at the time, right from before Monterey, Janis, she would say we would do a set, and Peter would sing a couple of songs. James would sing a song. There were songs that featured James' guitar playing. There was Janis's songs, and it was more of a mix, more like this is a band, and everybody got a little bit of the spotlight. Although it was recognized that Janis was a star and the featured performer of the band, as opposed to James. And she had started to kind of eclipse James, who was the original sort of person in the band, that was featured. And she really started to eclipse him. And then after Monterey, it really made a big jump that she was the band and what people came to see and what was promoted. And then eventually, of course, it went from Big Brother and Holding Company featuring Janis Joplin. At the very end in 1968,
Right.
it was Janis Joplin with Big Brother and Holding Company. And eventually it was Janis Joplin. So that was the turning point. And there's a certain kind of like sadness and when you think to some people, but some people look at that as a betrayal. I've had people come on and interview me and use that word. Do you feel that Janis betrayed you? And things like that. And I've said, I've had to sort of think about it a lot over, 50 years and so. And you look at it now and much more objectively, and I see that it was inevitable and that that certain people like James himself, James Gurley, really couldn't change his way of playing. He couldn't become like a blues rock player like an Eric Clapton, or anything like that. And she wanted to go more in that direction. She was a blues singer, and essentially, she really understood the fundamentals of blues. I think more so than anybody else in the band. Although we all love blues and we all wanted to play it, but she really had the fundamentals of that and wanted to go towards a blues and soul. She wanted to have like horns and what was happening at the time. She wanted to emulate Etta James and Aretha Franklin and that kind of thing. And that couldn't happen in the context of Big Brother and Holding Company, what we were and what we sort of like were hanging on to as a band. I think Peter and I and Sam really wanted to go in that direction, but we couldn't with James still in the band, and we couldn't give up. We were so much a family that we couldn't, kind of ditch somebody and put them out to pasture. We had to sort of. There was a feeling of like family and sticking together. And Janis, I think, had to leave that. She had to. I think the way I see it now, many years later. Unfortunately, what happened with that is that she lost the family. So She lost that connection, and that was detrimental, I think, to her going back into her older habits of alcohol and drugs, particularly heroin, which was already happening when she was in Big Brother. That was like didn't happen after she left Big Brother. That was already happening, but it sort of like went to another level after she left Big Brother.
Right. And when you were getting ready to make Cheap Thrills, did you, because this is happening after, did you have a sense going in with, Grossman as your manager and John Simon as a producer, that you were now, this was the next level? And did you feel a band unity, or did you already at that point feel that pull away that Janis
It was
was?
starting to break apart at that point, especially when we recorded Cheap Thrills, and it was a sort of a real coming to terms with reality because we had never really recorded in that way, and we thought we could record live and that would be really good. But then when you really start to record and you start to get listen back and you hear certain things and you really start to hear the imperfection and John Simon as a producer made us very, very aware of those imperfections, more so than our audience in San Francisco. Our audience in San Francisco was really accepting of the imperfections because of the energy, because of the total energy would outweigh. But when you're recording, and we're starting now to make a real record that we want it to be good and, really good on a musical level, then you start to hear that and you start to realize we have to get better as a band and all of that. So that was happening and there was conflict, but somehow I think we pulled it off. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
the record is a great record. It
Yeah,
came out anyway.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm curious, a couple questions on it. Summertime is definitive, Piece of My Heart is definitive, and these are covers. How did they come into the fold, and you guys decide that these two would be centerpieces of the album?
Piece of My Heart was brought to us by a member of the Jefferson Airplane, Jack Cassidy. Literally, I mean, Jack Cassidy heard the Irma Franklin original version of it, which is very soulful and deep and down and laid back. And he heard it and he came over one day to one of our rehearsals, literally, and said, "You guys should hear this song. You could do this and you could do it, your own way." And we did, and we started to practice it. And Sam, I think, really changed, was the person really thinking of the arrangement. I had a lot to do with the arrangement too, especially in the beginning, the way the drums drop in and out. All of that was sort of thoughts that I had about it. But starting it in F sharp was sort of Sam's idea, and modulating into the key and a whole bunch of things that we did that were not in the Irma Franklin version. It's really we big brotherized it completely. And of course, Janis's approach to the song was so much different and so much so much ballsier and out in your face, whereas Irma Franklin was like very soulful and laid back. You know. So anyway, that's how Piece of My Heart came about. Summertime was this is something that a lot of people won't believe, but we were actually doing Summertime before Janis came in the band. It was one of the things, to go back to your first question. We did things like Hole of the Mountain King, but we also did an instrumental version of Summertime. And the
Amazing.
reason we did it was because Sam had this idea, this little Bach thing, da 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 da. It was a little Bach partita that he knew and played on the guitar, and he thought it really worked well in the key. I think it was A minor was the key we were doing it in, and we did it as an instrumental. And Janis basically fit herself into that arrangement, which is really strange. A lot of people don't can believe want to believe that, but that's the truth. The arrangement and the idea mostly started with Sam, but playing it that with the particular beat and the particular sort of blues, low, well, laid back, slow blues rhythm to it, and all of that kind of thing, and then the dynamics. And then when we recorded it, John Simon came up with an idea, a particular idea, which we incorporated into the arrangement. So that modified it again in another way. But that arrangement really started before Janis was in the band. And of course, her singing of it is, it's incredible.
Incredible.
She did something with it that no other singer did with it.
Yeah.
So I think it all kind of that and Piece of My Heart are the two most, I think, of, if you go on Spotify and you see kind of what uh, Janis material, just Janis material gets the most streams. There are three things. So Bobby McGee,
Yeah.
Piece of My Heart, and Summertime.
Yeah.
And two of them are Big Brother.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some amazing footage I watched this week of you guys recording Summertime in the studio.
Yeah.
I don't know if you, I don't know if that, I just saw clips from a documentary. It was more of that. Was that whole session recorded when you were recording Cheap Thrill?
Some of it. I don't know if the whole thing was recorded. I mean, we recorded in New York. We recorded in L.A. Cheap Thrills recording went on for a couple of months. So Penny Baker was there in New York, I think, most of them.
Yeah.
With some cameras in the studio. And I think that's what you see is that stuff. And there's one other song, I think, that we recorded some stuff.
I want to ask you, actually, real quick. You lived in the Chelsea Hotel. Did you ever encounter the Factory Girls or the Warhol? As an artist, that must have been an interesting scene.
I didn't. I knew a lot of people living in the Chelsea Hotel, other artists, and there were people I knew who were in the Chelsea Hotel who I knew from the San Francisco Art Institute who had gone to New York to Maine, who were staying in Chelsea Hotel. So I knew, there was a lot of stuff in the Chelsea Hotel, a lot of different kinds of things going on there. Writers, all of that. I didn't know any of the Andy Warhol people. I think they came into Janis's world later when she was a solo artist and started to go to Max's, and then she kind of, there's pictures of her sitting with Andy Warhol and those people. They weren't part of Big Brother world when we were there.
Got it. I want to ask you, because without your inspiration and your suggestion for Rubber Crumb to do this cover, we would not have the amazing Cheap Thrills cover, which was supposed to be the back cover. And I'm curious if you could recount just how it ended up that you did get Robert to do this, and what was his reaction to it, and I'm particularly interested in his reaction to having changed some of his art right here.
Yeah,
adding his name instead of your song.
Yeah, that's another story. Yeah, we did this thing. It was one day when we were still living in Lagunitas, all living together, and we would rehearse every day. And Janis, people don't understand this about Janis, how free she was at a certain time, and willing to go on lots of different directions. But one day she said, "Hey, Dave, why don't you write a song?" Kind of half joking, but serious. I said, "Okay, I'm going to write a song." And this is the song. It's going to be like, I'm going to give you this rhythmic phrase and you can play any notes you want. So every day I say, okay, the first day was da 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 da, and everybody just play whatever notes. And anyway, so it went on for a few days like that. And then I said, okay, the bridge is just freak out, just play anything you want. And then we'll just stop it on a dime. We'll just do it for like maybe 20 seconds and then go back to them. So just like that song is A, B, A. Like that. And we did that. And then we started to perform it. And we would sometimes perform it at the end of a set, sort of a closing thing. It was just like a goof. It was almost like, I think something Frank Zappa would do something like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes we would start a set with it. And John Simon loved it. John Simon kind of was a very modern thinking, musically advanced guy. And he loved it. And he wanted to start the second side of the album with it. So it was called Harry. And Crumb did this caption or box there with a guy with a turban with minarets in the background. And it said Harry Kirshner, which was a pun on Harry Krishna. And anyway, that's the John Simon's original mix started the second side with Harry Kirshner. And Clive Davis got the John Simon's mix and said, "I hate that. I can't. We have to start the second side of the album with Janis. It has to be, the second song, which was Turtle Blues. So anyway, the pressure was on, and we just didn't want to fight it. We just didn't have the whatever it is, the moxie, the chutzpah at that time to fight Clive Davis and to stand up for our rights. And I was the one who was kind of going to lose my royalties on that,
Right.
but I just went along with everybody in the band. And they didn't tell Crumb. They didn't say anything to Crumb, to Robert. And they just changed. They thought, well, what are we going to do with that box? We have to put something there. So they just took out Harry Krishna and they put an Art R. Crumb.
Yeah.
And that pissed him off a lot because it was basically changing his artwork. And he didn't want his name associated with a guy with a turban. I mean, it just didn't make any sense in a lot of ways, to him or to anybody else with it, when you think about it. But so he didn't take the artwork back. He left the artwork at Columbia. And also, I don't think I've talked to him over the years. He's not sure whether he took the money, which was $600, or ever, whether he ever was paid, or he just said, don't even pay me. He doesn't remember. But he thinks he didn't get paid. But anyway, that artwork stayed in Columbia and eventually was stolen from Columbia's art department and auctioned at Sotheby's, and we sued Sotheby's, and we made a settlement with Sotheby's. Eventually, it was auctioned again at Sotheby's, another 10 years, sometime in the early 90s. And it's now, I believe, it's still owned by the guy who's the CEO of Nike. I think his name is Nick Parker or something. I'm not sure what his name is, but he has a collection of rock and roll memorabilia, incredible collection of rock and roll memorabilia. And that is one of his prized possessions. And I think the last time it was auctioned, the first time it was auctioned, which was in the early 80s probably, and that went for $25,000. And then the second time it was auctioned in the 90s, 10 years later, it went for $250,000. And now it's priceless.
Oh yeah, priceless.
That would be millions.
Absolutely.
It would be in the millions.
You know what happened? Because this was supposed to be the back cover. Do you know what happened to Robert's front cover?
He wonders that too. And I think that when the first auction happened at Sotheby's, there was something in their description. They said there was additional material. And I think it might have been the front cover was just Robert had taken just snapshots, Polaroids of everyone in the band, and he cut out their faces and just drew these like stick figures on a stage playing instruments. It wasn't great. It was okay. I mean, all his art is good, just say it's the style, but it wasn't a great idea. And the back cover was just, brilliant. He's a genius. So as soon as we saw it, I mean, Janis went and picked it up, literally like, I think 2 days after he had come to one of our shows. I mean, he just stayed up all night and did that. And she brought both things, and we were rehearsing. We had a warehouse then in San Francisco that we rehearsed at. And she brought it in, and we all looked at it and said, no, the back cover is the front cover.
Yeah. It surprises me that Columbia would have an issue with calling the album, what was it, Sex, Dope, and Cheap Thrills. Yet this has no issue for them.
That was, again, another thing that we didn't really fight very hard for. I mean, it was a suggestion, and we all laughed. Janis liked that. Let's call it Sex, Dope, and Cheap Thrills. But when they said, no, we can't do that, we went, okay. It's like that's sort of par for the course in those days. They were just, you couldn't do stuff like that because it wouldn't be, they couldn't put it on shelves in the Midwest and in the South and places like that and sell it. And Columbia, was thinking of worldwide distribution, didn't want to offend anybody. Now it's a different thing, everything's changed.
Yeah. And this was obviously a huge hit, and you toured behind it, I'm guessing, did some shows before Janis left.
Yeah, well, when Janis, right after the thing came out, right after it was released, Janis announced that she was going to leave the band. And so we said, well, let's do some touring so we can make some money, at least, let's get some gigs. And then, so basically from, I think it was September through the end of November, we were just on the road. We played a lot of shows, maybe 30 or 40 shows in 2 or 3 months. And then she left.
And then after she left, you guys have a sense that Big Brother, obviously Big Brother did end up continuing, but you went out and you played with Country Joe and did some projects between. Was there a sense that that was the completion of Big Brother once Janis left?
Yeah, I think there was because she took Sam with her into her first band, which was the Cosmic Movement, which was the horn band. And so Big Brother couldn't continue without Sam. James was really a mess at that point. James was drinking a lot, doing a lot of, he was doing a lot of like downers, like second alts and things like that. And he just wasn't able to play. And it was just kind of a mess. And Peter and I knew we couldn't like start the band with just James, get another guitarist to replace Sam, all of that. We just didn't know what we were going to do. And then just right into a few weeks after that, um, Country Joe had split up. Country Joe and the Fish had split up, and Joe and Barry called us up and said, "We'd like you guys to be part of Country Joe and the Fish, and we're going to Europe." And Big Brother had never been to Europe, and so that was kind of great. We went really literally from being a number one band into being another number one band, which at that time was fabulous. We toured all through Scandinavia, and the opening band in most of the Scandinavian countries, cities, was Led Zeppelin.
Oh
The
wow,
opening band.
that's amazing.
That was crazy. Yeah.
What a double bill. How did the audience react
The
to?
audience was there for Country Joe. It's very strange and
Wow.
hard to believe these days, but literally, nobody really knew who Led Zeppelin was at that time. They just formed, and Country Joe had a big audience in Scandinavian countries because of the anti-war thing.
Yeah.
Because he represented a whole anti-war movement because of the song he'd written called "Fixing to Die Red" was big, and a lot of people who were dodging the draft, who were escaping from the draft in the United States, had gone to Canada. Many had gone to Sweden and Denmark. So he had a lot of Americans, just a whole lot of a very strong following in Europe at that time. He was very big in Europe, and so he was he was the headliner on all of these shows in Stockholm and Gothenburg and those Scandinavian cities. And it was funny because I mean there were literally times when people during Led Zeppelin's set were yelling "Country Joe." They didn't, they weren't like an audience for sort of like that progressive rock.
Yeah.
The guys in Country Joe, I mean, Peter and I and Barry, we would be standing on the side of the stage listening to Led Zeppelin and going like, oh, you know, these guys are fucking incredible, like, but you didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, they didn't know how big they were going to be, but they were obviously great band and great players, great musicians. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. And then you came back and you linked with Nick Gravenites, who I know you met in that original time when you were in Chicago with
Right.
Janis during the mainstream.
Right. Exactly.
And I always
Yeah.
loved that Be a Brother album. I had it. It burned in the
Mhm.
fire, but I loved it. That was a good
Yeah.
one.
There's some good stuff on it. And we actually, when we perform, we play one thing. We play a song called "Keep On Keeping On" from that album. Yeah, when we came back, we didn't know. Peter and I quit Country Joe and the Fish, which I still don't understand even to this day. It was like a great gig. We were making great money. We were playing fabulous venues, but somehow we thought that we could start Big Brother again and bring it to the level that somehow we had been at. I think we were completely deluded, but I don't, I think about it and it's crazy, but we did that. We quit Country Joe. And this is why we didn't play Woodstock. We would have been playing Woodstock with them. But anyway, we quit Country Joe and we started to rehearse in San Francisco at the warehouse that we had. We had a very big warehouse that we rehearsed at. with David Nelson, who
Hmm.
later on became his own. But he was a friend of Peter's from the whole folk days, the Palo Alto folk scene with Jerry Garcia, Robert Hunter, and David Nelson. So Peter was very close with David Nelson. We started to rehearse with David Nelson. We're starting to do kind of country kind of things with him. And Albert came out to hear us, and Albert had a singer that he wanted us to incorporate into it. Who I can't think of his name right now, but he was a Canadian, like a kind of Gordon Lightfoot kind of guy. And he brought him out and sang with us. And somehow it didn't fit, the vibe wasn't right. And we didn't know kind of where it was gonna go. And then Sam was fired. Janis fired Sam Andrew, and he came back to San Francisco. And with Sam and Peter and I started to jam, and we thought, and then Nick started to come over and hang out with us. And then James, who had sort of gone through a whole rehabilitation and stopped using, decided he wanted to play bass. And he would play bass. He wouldn't play guitar anymore,
Mm.
which really opened up a lot of doors for us musically. Because we had Nick, who's a real blues guy, and we had Sam, and Peter played guitar, and Peter's style was very much a folk blues style of blues guitar playing. And I was playing drums, and James was playing bass, and James was an interesting bass player. His approach to bass was completely different than his guitar playing. It was more, playing patterns and playing very interesting patterns and staying in rhythm and all of that. And then we got another guy, another guitarist who was in a side band that I had been in called the New Boogaloo Express, a guy named David Shallett, who had played with the Sons of Champlin. And David started jamming with us. So we had a whole new thing happening. And then we, went in the studio with Nick producing and the Be a Brother. We were still signed as Columbia artists, Big Brother and Holding Company. And they were willing to put out whatever we put out. So we wound up doing two albums, one which Nick produced. And then the second one was How Hard It Is, was the last one, came out I think early 72. And that has one song of Nick's on it, which is Buried Alive in the Blues, which is
Right.
the song he had written for Janis, which she never recorded the vocal for on the Pearl album, and he sang it.
Right.
So that was basically it.
And you
We
guys,
had good people. We had really some great musicians in the early 70s with Big Brother. And we toured. We went from being like a headliner to being an opening band, we played the Fillmore East as an opening band for, I forget who was the headliner. I think it was like a band with Billy Cobham. It was a fusion band. But anyway, we still toured and we still played festivals, and we had a couple of years of, still making money and still having pretty good scene. And we had people like Mike Finnegan playing keyboards. We had Richard Green sometimes on violin. We had great people coming and going in the band. Kathy McDonald sang with us for a while. It was an interesting time. It was an interesting time, and we made some really really interesting music. But we really had made a decision, which I'm not sure was a good commercial decision, but we didn't want to do any of Cheap Thrills. We
yeah,
said we're not going to get another singer like Janis. We're not going to do that. If we had been sort of more focused on the business of music and trying to sort of succeed, what we should have done immediately is go out and get another Janis and do the Chief Thrills and do it with a singer that's as good as Janis. And there were some who wanted it. There was Kathy McDonald would have been completely willing to do that. And there were other singers too and sort of waiting in the wings to take her place. And somehow we just, crazy times, we just said, no, we're going to reinvent ourselves. We're going to do completely different music than that. And we did. And of course, we didn't sell any records. We created these albums that are kind of legendary for people like collectors who know the early music of that time. And there's some great stuff on both of them, but they sold, less than 100,000 records, I believe. And Columbia eventually dropped us.
I read that Eddie Money auditioned for Big Brother and the Holding Company.
He
You have
did.
it? You did.
It did. when we had that period of time, then I said after after Peter and I had left Country Joe and the Fish, and we were thinking about, starting Big Brother again. I think he came up to the warehouse at Sanders. He told me, and he's gone now, but I ran into him one day, and he had a great memory of it. I didn't have a big memory.
How rock and roll history might have changed if that happened. And then the other thing I read, which is interesting, is you played with Ronnie Montrose during that period. Yeah. What was a young Ronnie Montrose like? I love
Yeah, that was an incredible. I was in this band. It was called Pendergrass. It was Kathy McDonald and myself. Kathy McDonald asked me to join this band. She had already been in it, and she had a boyfriend at the time, Howie, who played bass. He's a really good bass player. And there was another guitarist named Michael Pendergrass and a keyboard player, Roy Schmal, who was great. And they asked me to play drums with them. And then she got Ronnie Montrose into it. She knew Ronnie. I didn't know Ronnie, but we did a couple of gigs with Ronnie. He was not really known then. It was before he started
yeah.
with Montrose. But he came into the band. We played the Keystone Berkeley. We played Keystone San Francisco. I think we played the Lion's Share in San Anselmo. We played maybe 3 gigs with Ronnie. And he was, just incredible player, and very confident, really confident player. And we recorded one of the shows. It was, I think, the show at the Lion's Share. And somewhere in the mid '90s, I went to Europe, to France, and put that tape out as a record called "You Can't Go Home Again"
Wow.
on a small label in France called Legend Records, which doesn't exist anymore. And so there's some tracks there. There's about 4 or 5 tracks with Ronnie playing, but at the time he didn't want his name. He was still playing. He was still alive, and I guess it was Montrose. He's still doing Montrose, and he was a little reluctant. I think he might have been even signed to a label, and there was some problem about putting his name on it. So we said Mystery Man guitar.
Wow. Interesting.
And then now it's okay. I talked to him sometime at that point. He had a website. He had a website, and on his website, he would get artists, visual artists, and feature them on his website. And he asked me at some point to use my art on his website. So we had a nice conversation. And then he had cancer of some kind, and he killed himself. He took his own life, which is really bad. I mean, sad for me.
Yeah, sad for all music fans. He was a tremendous player.
Tremendous
those
player.
records. Yeah,
Really strong player.
yeah.
Anyway, if you want to hear those tracks are on a record called "Can't Go Home Again."
I'm gonna find that.
Kathy McDonald, the lead singer in that band. It's under the title. It's "Can't Go Home." It says "Big Brother and Holding Company with Friends," and I don't know why we did that, but I think it was the label in Europe and France didn't want to put it out and call it Pendergrass.
Yeah.
So I said, if you could put it out as Big Brother, I said, we can't put it out as Big Brother. That's Big Brother and Friends. So it's like there's maybe 6 tracks of this band Pendergrass, and then there's about 4 or 5 other tracks that are actually Big Brother.
Amazing. I'm gonna look that up today.
Yeah.
David,
It's hard to find. It's rare. You could find it probably on eBay. I can make a copy of it and send it to you. I don't have many of them. I think I have a couple of CDs somewhere.
I'll let you know if I can't find it. I'll go on YouTube. Tends to I tend to
YouTube
find.
has a few of the tracks up there.
Yeah.
There's a track of Kathy singing. It's called "Don't You Call Me Crying." It was a song by a guy named Lane Teachin, who was a local writer. And there's the title track, "Camping," was something that Kathy had done. She was playing in a group at one point. So I think of his name, Nils. He was Elton John's drummer.
Oh, Nigel Olsen.
Nigel Olsen. Yeah, she was playing with Nigel Olsen, And it was a song that she did with Nigel Olsson, and then she did it with this band Pendergrass. So that's one of the songs she does. I Know, which is an R&B thing. She does As the Years Go Passing By, which is Albert King thing. I think some great stuff on it. She was something else. Yeah.
And then after that, you took an interesting path where you did like cabaret music, you did some new age music, meditation music.
I did a lot of stuff in the,
Yeah.
you know, 70s and 80s, playing with a lot of different people, and it really expanded my range as a musician. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I was just from a certain point on. Once the Big Brother ended, I was really all of a sudden I was a musician. I was just a musician, and I had to sort of get myself to another level to sustain myself as a musician. I couldn't be a guy who could just play what Big Brother did. I had to be a guy who could play a lot of other styles, to play, cabaret music, whatever you want to call it, jazz, things like that, some other things.
That's a really good segue into the new music because
Yeah.
what the new album, anthems, themes, little stories, you from what I when I hear it, I hear all these influences and all the things that you've played over your lifetime
Yeah.
synthesized into these various
Right.
songs. You want to tell me a little about the backstory and the history of the record? Because I know you've been working on these songs for.
Well, I made another CD at some point when Big Brother was still very active touring in the early 2000, 2007, 2008, 2009. I was starting to compose a lot. I was starting to write a lot on keyboards, play piano. I'm not really a piano player. I could play gigs as a piano player, but I play things and I compose, and I approach piano a lot like a drummer, that I'll figure out something with my left hand, figure out something with my right, and coordinate them together and, create these small pieces of music. So I was composing a lot and I wanted to do a CD, and I felt that the music I was composing didn't really work for Big Brother, the vibe of Big Brother. And I did an album. And the key thing that got me to do the album was I had this song that I had written with Janis just before she left Big Brother, and it was called Can't Be the Only One. She had written words. I had written a blues riff that I played for her, and we played it one day at rehearsal, and she really liked it. She said, I'm going to write words for that. And then she handed me these words one day at the Chelsea Hotel, by the way. And then she left the band, and we never did it. We never rehearsed it. And I didn't even have a melody for it, but I had these words, and I have showed them to people every once in a while. These are words Janis wrote, and they were very autobiographical. They were about her time at that time of making this jump to another thing in her musical career, and the fears and the apprehension she had about it. And that was in the lyrics of that song. I thought, this is great. And so I wanted to record it. At the time I was doing stuff, Kathy McDonald was down here. She lived in Seattle, but she was down in the Bay Area. And anyway, long story short, we went in and we recorded that song, and we created a melody and parts to it. And that was a song called Camp. And that would be the thing that sort of I hoped would get the album sold, or, out into the world. That there was a song that was lyrics by Janis Joplin, music by Dave Getz. And to some extent it did. It created some attention. And so I did that album. And then the other stuff on the album was these compositions that I did. And, I just kept writing. And then over the years, in the last 10 years, I've had this idea, I have probably about 40 or 50 compositions. And at some point, I started a band with some other musicians, and the band was called Noisy Children. And we performed, I played some gigs and performed some of these compositions. And people liked them, other musicians liked them, like playing them. And so, anyway, I mean, Tom Finch, who's a guitar player who has played with Big Brother since the late 90s, is a great friend and like a kind of a younger brother. We come close. and we've traveled a lot together. We worked a lot together, and he was part of this band, Noisy Children. He was one of the people in that band. And we played in other bands. I played in his band, the Tom Finch Group. So we've worked together over the years. And somewhere in the last couple of years, we've talked about this. Let's record. Let's record some of these songs. And Tom, over that same time, has developed a studio. He's developed a mastery of a program called Logic, which is a recording program, sort of like Pro Tools. It's very similar, but it's better in a way. And Tom's become good with Logic, and he has this studio, and it's turned into a recording studio. And he has to move. And so somewhere in last summer, we just looked at each other and said, let's record. Let's, get in there. And just starting with just the two of us, me laying down keyboard tracks, and then mostly to a click track so that I could put drums over it. So I'm starting out with that, and him laying guitar tracks and using MIDI to create other sounds. And just the two of us, really, we created this album. And at some point later on, we wanted solos. We wanted certain solos on some of the tracks, not all of them. On most of the tracks when we were recording, Tom would sometimes do solos and things like that. And I would say to him, I don't really want this record to be, it's not a blowing record. It's not a record where I'm creating these tracks and you blow over it, you solo over it. I want you to create parts. Yeah. I want to create these as compositions, as complete compositions in and of themselves. And the solos themselves can happen, but what's more important is to create the piece itself first as a unified composition. So that was the focus, and Tom really got that. He really understood that, and we're very compatible in that way. It was a really great partnership, I felt. And then, like I say, then later on we felt, okay, we could put like a saxophone solo here. Yeah. But we really need somebody who really can play piano to do a solo here. And so John Vaughn is a virtuoso player. And then Charles Moselle, who played the bansuri, the Indian flute and saxophone. He's another just great player, just fabulous players, jazz players, who really have serious chops. And, we brought them in to do some of the solos and like that. And I'm really happy with the result. I think it's very unique. And it's good, and it's really rewarding to me because you spend nowadays, like you spend, say, 8 months we didn't do this every day. Right, we did it a couple of nights a week, over an 8-month period. And sometimes it was more concentrated. Sometimes we didn't do anything for a few weeks. We were on the road or doing other things. But we got to a certain level with this, and I felt we really have something. We really have something great. And you go and you master it, and you send the thing to your masters, and I did the artwork and all of that. And you put this piece together, and you think of it as it's your art. It's something you've really created, and you put everything, your entire soul, your creativity into it, and you make like 100 copies of it with CD Baby. And then you start sending them out to friends and other musicians who you think might get it. Some musicians won't get it because some musicians are just like, I know people who are they only listen to blues, yeah, or they only listen to Americana, and they're not maybe going to get it. They're not going to be able to go in all of these places. Yeah. So it's interesting. And then, I sent it to certain people I know that are critics that write about it. And so you start to get feedback. You start to get people like you who will say, wow, I listened to your CD and it's really great and it's really interesting. And, they start to get it. It's a very small percentage. And of the 100 records you send out, it may be 25 people or 20 people that come back and really listen to it and really get it. But then it's rewarding. It's inspiring to kind of go on and to maybe try to get it out further into the world. So that's what I'm dealing with now, is how do you get it out? So you upload it onto all of the platforms, Spotify and Pandora and all of the things like that, Apple Music, things like that. You do that, and you know, there's problems with that. And you try to put it up on YouTube, you maybe create a video or something. It's really an interesting thing. It's a whole other
Yeah.
thing that
It
I'm
is.
not good at, and I don't really want to do. I really want to just make the music. And I wish there was somebody like that could just take it now and say, okay, I'll distribute it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not like that anymore. It's like, when you're an independent artist and you're my age and you don't have I don't have a band to tour and
Right.
play this music or an agent to book it or anything like that. So it's a challenge. It's just a challenge. But at the same time, in that challenge is people like you and other people like Paul Liberatore writing for the Marin IJ and Ben Fontoris loved my album and a few other people in New York who have written back to me and say, this is great. I'm listening to your album and I've listened to it 5 times. Or it's things like that that really, make you feel great that you did it.
Yeah. Did you do the artwork? Did you draw the artwork or paint the
The
artwork?
artwork is all artwork I've done,
Yeah.
and they're all self-portraits or I've done over the years. I didn't do them specifically for this album. They're just things that I thought I wanted to use for the album to
That's
represent
really
the
cool.
music.
I encourage anyone who's listening to check out the artwork. You can find the album on Spotify. You can search Dave Getz and you can find the album. You go to the Big Brother and the Holding Company website. Pop up will come up,
That's
show
right.
you the album, show you the beautiful artwork.
That's right.
It's
That's
totally,
it. That's it at this point for
yeah,
the album. That's the only way you can get the actual CD is to send me money in PayPal or Venmo, and I'll go to the post office and actually send you a CD.
amazing. And you autograph it too, right? On there it says,
I can autograph it.
yeah,
I don't autograph it unless they pay me extra because I've got to take the thing out and
yeah,
cut
yeah,
the shrink wrap and pull the shrink wrap out. It's work.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm happy you've released the music. Is there any? I know you said you don't have a band to tour, but have you played any of the music over the years locally with people out for the public?
There's Tom really wants to. Tom Finch. We've talked in the last week or two even about it. He said, let's get some gigs. Let's do this stuff. Let's actually perform this. And the thing for me is that I'm 85 years old. I'm a young 85 years old.
Yeah,
And I say I'm like a late bloomer, and I still, my drumming, my playing is as good as it ever was. I don't play with the intensity that I did when I was 27. Can't play that way. I can't break sticks and break drumlets. But on other levels and sensitivity and sense of rhythm and ideas and things like that, I'm as good as I ever was. And I love to play. But what I don't like to do is I don't like to carry drums and
hmm
schlep drums around. And, of course, when we're touring with Big Brother and Country Joe and all that, you have a roadie. You have a guy that does that. And I don't have that anymore. And I had a person in the Bay Area here, a guy, another drummer, great drummer actually, whose name was Paul Scannell. And Paul was doing that for me because he's a younger guy and he loves me and he loves my playing. So he said, anytime you have a gig, I'll do your drums for you and I'll carry you.
amazing.
And he has a van and all of that. He just moved to Hawaii. So I don't have that now. So I'm kind of reluctant to go out and do gigs in clubs that don't pay a lot of money. If it pays a lot of money, I could hire somebody to do that. But I'm
Right,
sort of I've been doing this for I've literally been doing drumming for 70 years,
amazing.
playing professionally for 70 years. And I just don't want to schlep drums around anymore.
I don't blame
And
you.
that's a stopping point for me. But at the same time, it's tough because I want to play. I want to perform and I want to play with good musicians and I want to play this music. So we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll wait for the Tom Finch really wants to put a band together and go and do it. And we may have something. We have an offer to play soon at an art center in Mill Valley here in Marin County. They've offered me something to do this music. So I have an incentive now to put this band together. And all of the people that I mentioned that are on the CD John Varn and Charles and Tom and myself and a bass player. They all want to do it. They all, yeah. We'd love to play this music. So,
I read that. Amazing. Well, David, I appreciate the time, all these
mhm.
recollections.
Yeah, good questions.
This was
Thanks.
incredible, man. David, I appreciate you so much,
Okay.
brother. And you be
Take care,
well.
man.
I'll be back in touch soon.
Okay,
Cheers.
Scott, take care.